The following recording is presented for your enjoyment. This classic work is now in the public domain, making it freely available to be shared and appreciated by all. Some elements may appear outdated or insensitive by today's standards, but we present this work in its original form to preserve its historical context and literary significance. Sit back, relax, and indulge in this timeless tale. Like, comment, and subscribe.
Call for Claws by Lewis Island from Adventures into Darkness number 9, April 1953. Old Bates knew a magic word, but he used it once too often. He wore an overcoat and an old felt hat, winter or summer, in icy blasts or on the hottest, muggiest days. People said it was to conceal the rags he wore beneath. His rusty, bedraggled beard was only about 3 inches long, so he must have hacked away at it sometimes with an old knife or pair of shears. But nobody really knew much about Old Bates. You could hardly blame the children on Henry Street for hooting and jeering at such a scarecrow. But Old Bates did blame them, and their parents, and he had his plans for each and every one of them, very unpleasant plans. Old Bates, yah! That was Jimmy Randall. Old Bates had marked him long ago. He would be one of the first to go. Old Bates shuffled faster over the dusty vacant lot to his little tin-roofed shack at the back. If he had only brought his gnarled stick with him. They always ran fast enough when they felt its sting on their backs. He pushed into the gloom of his shack and lit a stub of candle. In its flickering light, he eagerly tore the wrappings from the precious parcel he had carried under his arm. The blue chalk, the powdered alum, the scorpion's claws, all were here. He already had the bat's blood and the candle made from corpse fat. Now to try the next spell in his tattered little ancient book. The Call to the Claws. With trembling fingers, he carefully unwrapped a crooked, greasy white candle from its cotton wool and set it in the center of the dirty table. He dipped the blue chalk in blood and alum, and around the candle he drew a square inside an 8-pointed star. Then he pressed the 2 scorpion's claws firmly, one on each side of the candle, and lit it. Now for the test. He looked about him for some small object anything would do, and selected a gnawed bone from his unwashed plate. Placing it inside the square, he gave one last look at the open pages of his old book and said loudly, "Mlinksirata!" As he spoke, 2 hairy yellow claws appeared from the empty air above the square, clutched the bone eagerly, and disappeared. Old Bates gave a screech of triumph. Another spell had worked. How the world would shudder when it learned that the old tales of sorcery, of calling up demons, were true. That the ancient book Old Bates had stolen from the museum was not just a curiosity, but had made him the master of the world. The time was almost at hand. He would start with Henry Street, with those who feared, or pitied, or laughed at him, those who wasted good money for rent, clothes, and expensive food. He thought gloatingly of the rusty tin cans stuffed with coins buried under the packing case floor. His shack kept the rain off, and his rags kept the cold out, and his crusts and leavings of food kept him alive. Only fools wanted more. He turned back to his precious book. If the square be large, the claws be large. Let ye first candle burn to its end, for hereafter ye need it not, but the blue chalk only. If ye. Suddenly he leaped savagely to his feet, his face twisted in hatred. How could he study these long-forgotten arts, with those brats yelling, screaming, playing, in the vacant lot outside his door? Perhaps the time was now. He slipped the blue chalk in his pocket, grasped his knotted stick. Outside, darkness had fallen. The 3 boys had given up their game of ball, and were hot at a game of tag. Marion, Jimmy's little 5-year-old sister, sent to bring Jimmy home, saw Old Bates first. "Run!" she screeched, taking to her heels. "It's Old Bates!" "This ain't your lot," yelled one of the boys. "We got a right to play here." But Old Bates had no intention of chasing them with his stick, not this time. It was still light enough for the boys to see something they had never seen before. Old Bates was smiling. "I just learned a new game today, boys," he said as beguilingly as he could, in his scratchy voice. "It's heaps of fun, and I know you'll like it too. I've got a new football in my shack, and I'm going to give it to the boy that wins this game. Here, let's go over to the sidewalk, and I'll show you." Suspiciously, half frightened yet tempted on the sidewalk, he drew a blue chalk square within an 8-pointed star. "Sometimes I use a candle with this game," leered Old Bates, "but I don't really need it anymore. Now you three boys stand right inside this square little girl. You run along home. This game is only for boys." Marion ran for home, crying, and Bates turned to see the three boys in the square. His eyes lighted with triumph. He flung his skinny arms high over his head. "Mlinksirata!" he screeched. "Mlinksirata!" Two immense, hairy yellow paws appeared, clutched the boys, and vanished. It happened so suddenly that they had no time to scream. Only the raucous laughter of old Bates was heard in the darkness. When the boys didn't come home that night, and Marion said they had been with old Bates, the police came to question him, and again the next day. But there was no clue. Old Bates had washed the square and the star off the sidewalk with soap and water, just to be on the safe side. And the police didn't even look at his little old book. Why should they? Late that night, old Bates set out on one of his scavenging tours. The things people threw away, sometimes the bones of a whole roast chicken, made good soup. He was chuckling as he returned to the darkened sidewalk in front of the vacant lot. "Brats," he mumbled. "Them and their noise. Sure got rid of them, Casey. Mustn't forget that word Mlinksirata." A choked scream, and Bates wasn't there anymore. And from seemingly empty air stumbled three frightened boys, crying, running for home. No one believed their story naturally of demons and great gray caverns and roasting fires being prepared for them, and a great hairy yellow claw that released them when it grabbed for Old Man Bates. No, the boys had just slept out in the woods all night and made up a story to tell. Marion showed the boys the diagram M piece of blue chalk she had found in the vacant lot, a square in an 8-pointed star, exactly like the one she had watched Old Man Bates draw. She said she had drawn it the day after the boys disappeared, so they could teach her the game when they got back. But the boys didn't like the game anymore. No one knew where old Bates had disappeared to, and no one cared. Finally, his shack and everything in it was carried off to the junk pile. The rains came and washed away the blue chalk diagram, and they washed up the rusty tin cans too. Bates wouldn't like it if he knew his money had gone to build a fine new playground for the brats. But what happened to it?